Hello YouTube, as promised, as a pendant to the Farnese Hercules program I made for you guys about a month ago, today I have the Apollonian type workout for those of you that want a more aesthetic, slimmer type of physique. If you want to have the ability to actually follow with me during the review of the program, you can access it directly in the description. And for the general idea surrounding the reason why I created that program, well, it's because I understand that some people are not super interested in mass, and what they want first and foremost is flow. And therefore, they're going to be much more likely to follow what is known as the Greek ratio. The Greek ratio quickly is an aesthetic formula in a sense. It's mathematically calculating the type of proportions that are going to be the most appealing to the human eye. So for example, we applied what is also known as the golden ratio to the human face, and we found that there are certain proportions that need to be matched to have the perfect quote-unquote face. And it's interesting because that very same number, I think it's also called the Fibonacci number, can be applied to everything. So if you look at a building, for example, if it matches the golden ratio, it's going to be appealing to the eye, etc., etc. And therefore, what we bodybuilders call an aesthetic physique tends to be something very close to that Greek ratio, which is also why when you look at their statues and even statues during the Renaissance period, they all also were as close to possible to the golden ratio, meaning that everything was in balance and everything flowed. It's also the reason why many people nowadays think that bodybuilders look like shit. It's because the golden ratio has been done away with. No one follows it anymore. The physiques are completely out of proportion. So, if you're the type that wants to go back to this Greek, to this aesthetic age of the statues of old, this is the program for you. It's the program for you to build a conventionally aesthetic physique that is going to be based on certain types of statues, like Greek statues or the statue of David that I used for this thumbnail, because to me it is the perfect representation of the type of physique that the program I made for you guys is going to help you achieve. But keep in mind one thing, I also do think that some of these statues were a little bit small, like the statue of David was a little bit small, meaning that it lacks muscularity. So what I want you to picture in your head as you're going to try to visualize what you're going to look like with this program is something slightly bigger, okay? Because we always want to push the build. We always want to be higher, to be more developed. That being said, it's always going to be within that ratio. So the program is made like this. It's made with balance in mind. If you go into the description and you compare it with the Farnese Hercules program, you'll see that the differences are striking, because the Farnese Hercules, even though he has a balanced physique, is much more concerned with chaos. There are certain parts of the body that are blown out of proportion because it adds to the aesthetic, whereas today we're talking order, we're talking structure, we're talking everything perfectly within the frame. And therefore, if you also want to be able to follow along, in this video I am going to include pictures of the statues that I thought about, that I meditated with, to be able to come up with something that will be actually able to recreate them in real life. And for the most part, this led me to an aesthetic vision that is much more focused on the V taper, the infamous V taper that everyone wants to achieve, as opposed to an X taper. The X taper is the taper of the Farnese Hercules. It's bigger legs, a bigger core, and bigger arms. The V taper is much more focused on the torso and that V shape that gives the illusion of wider shoulders, of a smaller waist, etc., etc., that most of these statues actually corroborate, actually represent to a T. It also is something that is accompanied with a trim core. So we're going to develop the core, but we're not going to go overblown. And we are going to, in a sense, try to keep everything as tight and as sharp as humanly possible. As I said again, this is opposed to my Farnese Hercules program, where the physique is overflowing, right? It cannot be contained. It's the idea that it gives. It's again that primordial chaos. Whereas today we want again everything according to that golden ratio. And that leads to something that I want to tackle right now before it becomes a problem when you see the program. all of that, the V-taper aesthetic, looking like a Greek statue, all things that many men actually aspire to achieve, and that's perfectly respectable if that's what you want, also hinges on the idea of having a small waist. Having a small waist is mostly genetics based on your bone structure, d'accord? It's important to keep in mind because many people psychote and think that if they do certain exercises, they're going to end up with a big waist. Take it from someone who has a big waist. I was born with it, all right? You're not going to wake up one day with that big fat waist that many people, many men are quote-unquote cursed with. But it's also true that there are certain exercises that are going to develop muscles around the waist, and therefore it's not that they have to be avoided, but if you want to preserve that tightness of the waist, you have to make sure you don't go overboard. So that goes for all of the heavy knee flexions and the heavy hip hinges, rows, etc. Now, do not fall for the trap of listening to pro bodybuilders who are on a ton of hormones, who have that beer belly, that pregnant belly, who tell you it's because they did too many compounds. That is bogus. You will not end up bloated because you did a few sets of squats, but if you do it too much, you will. For guys like me with a big waist, it's good to do that type of exercises because we have a big waist regardless. So it's always best to build our obliques because it looks better. Look at the Farnese Hercules. He has a monstrous waist and it looks badass. But if your goal is that V-taper, whether you are born with that small waist or not, we are going to work towards that. So it's also reflected in the program. Another thing reflected in the program that looks a little bit cryptic at first is those weird symbols, those symbols of the Greek alphabet. What do they represent? Well, they represent nucleus overload. If you don't know what it is, I put the video that explains it in the description, but it's a method of training. It's extremely easy to understand. For this program in particular, there are only 3 types of nucleus overloads we're going to do. Lats, shoulders, and abs. These are the 3 areas that we need to hyper-focus on to get that V-taper and to get that flow going. But you will see that it's infrequent in the program and it's very minimal, again, compared to the previous Farnese Hercules program. And yet, I still encourage you to do it because you will see that it is going to yield great results. Now, the exercises I advise you to actually espouse for these muscle groups in particular. For the lats, pullovers. Do your pullovers, especially if you want that expansion of the rib cage, you want that V-taper, it is absolutely mandatory. On top of that, I did not program heavy pullovers in the program, so if you don't do them with nucleus overload, you don't do them at all. Another mean of nucleus overload for the lat would be lat pull downs, or it would be pull-ups. You could do something like the grease the groove method. For shoulders, face pulls, lateral elevations, okay? Do not, for the love of God, do overhead press for nucleus overload. You want to stick with something that is going to be light and easy. And it's great because you will find that the pullovers have a tendency to overtax the shoulders. So you could actually marry that with the face pulls for shoulders nucleus overload, or lateral raises if your goal is just pure hypertrophy. And then for the abs, it's a little bit special. For the abs, you'll either do an ab exercise, or vacuums. Because if you want that classic physique, if you want that slightly bigger aesthetic of the Greek statue, having control over your waist and your stomach in particular is important. For guys like me, I don't give a fuck. I don't do vacuums, they're useless for my shape. But for you, it might be important because it actually might help for you if you want to pose or even just to actually keep that waist slim, because I do believe that vacuums have that propensity as well. So this is that for the nucleus overload. As far as the frequency goes, this is a relaxed program because there aren't many exercises because the amount of muscularity you're wishing to develop is not that high. Meaning that you are painting, you are sculpting, you're creating art, don't get me wrong, but it's fairly minimalist, meaning that your canvas is not gigantic, it's small. Doesn't mean that it's easy, doesn't mean that you have to be lazy, but it just means that you're going to be much more focused on the details and you're going to paint with a very fine brush, whereas guys like me, we come at it with a truelle. You know these things that guys use in construction sites to lay cement on top of bricks? That's exactly what I use to paint because I want mass. What you want is that Greek ratio, so you have to have that different approach. There's only 4 days in the program. It's perfectly acceptable to do 2 days, 1 rest day or even 2 rest days, 2 days, etc. Approach the frequency like this. Even though the days don't look that long, I'm still packing some decent volume in them. So don't be overzealous. Don't try to do 4 days in a row because you might just end up hurting your recovery. All of that is up to you. I am giving you the template as is. It is up to you again to make it work. I'm giving you the formula for the golden ratio, but you can still get the wrong answer if you don't know how to do math. So without further ado, let us get into the review of the program, a quick presentation for you guys. That's in the description again. First day is an upper. You'll start with an horizontal press. A bench, a dip, or weighted push-up, it truly doesn't matter. You could do ring push-ups if you wanted, I don't care. 3 sets, 6 to 10 to develop the arms, the chest, and the shoulders. It's a great start for an upper day, especially if you want to develop those pectorals that are important because all of those Greek statues, even though they don't have those massive titties, they have pretty well-defined pecs. And you're going to superset that stuff with dumbbell rows, 3 sets of 8 to 12, or reverse rows, 3 sets as many reps as possible just for body weight. That is for additional upper back work. You can never get enough upper back work. I've started to realize that doing just the bench and then just resting for 5 minutes was a waste of time. I've personally changed my ways when it comes to my program, so I'm changing as well when it comes to that. The more I advance, the more I realize that even strength work can be supersetted if done properly and not with something that is actually strenuous, and that's not even true for the upper body, so that's exactly what happens here. Then for the next line of sets, dumbbell or barbell overhead press, the one that you prefer, 4 sets of 6 to 12. And then we superset that with the first nucleus overload, which is abs, then a French press or skull crushers. Now, I see too many people being afraid of supersets, especially those that look like they are antagonist muscles. You will not lose performance if you do something for the long head of the tricep after a press. Trust me, I tested it. Unless you're an alien or I'm just myself an alien, it shouldn't impact performance that much. Or worst case scenario, you lose a rep, but it's all worth it because the superset makes you gain so much time. The thing too with that program is that I understand that some of you don't vibe with that superset stuff, maybe because you are not in a home gym, and therefore there's not enough exercises for you not to be able to split it. So if you really don't like supersets, just split the exercises in 2 and it should be okay. Then you will do hammer curls for the forearms and the biceps, and another nucleus overload for the lats this time. So it's a giant set of 5 exercises, and it's 4 sets. This is actually going to be challenging for your cardio, so don't hesitate to go at your own pace. But this entire upper day should take you no more than an hour and 30 minutes, 45 minutes if you are really, really slow. And that is with taking actually rests in between the sets. So this is for the start. As you see, we are approaching it with a more laid back strategy. I'm still targeting the muscles of the upper body, but it's 1 exercise per muscle group. It's usually compound movements with a few isolations thrown in. It's nothing truly serious, and there's a reason for that. This is the type of physique that, in my humble opinion, will be developed as you start training, and then from that you will go somewhere else. Meaning that you could just stick to the golden ratio, but you're going to, in a sense, graduate to a bigger statue, one that is still aesthetic, but with more muscle mass. So that is, again, something that would be much closer to a late novice, early intermediate program, whereas the Farnese Hercules program is more of a late intermediate, early advanced program. Even though I think that these categories don't really mean much, it's more in relation with the volume and intensity and frequency of set programs. Okay. Then the upper-lower hybrid that follows the upper. Why an hybrid? Well, because I'm not going to have you do 2 strict lower days because all of these statues with the golden ratio have smaller legs. Look at the legs of the guys from the silver and the bronze era. They had smaller legs compared to today. Why? Because they were going for the V-taper. They were going for balance. Nowadays you have freaks like me who want tree trunk legs, but for this program in particular, we are sticking with the statue aesthetic. So the first lower day is as concerned with the upper development as with the lower, which means you'll start with a deadlift, an RDL, or a good morning. Lifts that, yes, are going to grow your posterior chain tremendously, but via the stretch or via the contraction of the thoracic spine, they're also going to work the yoke. And then you'll do some seated calf raises for the calf development because, and that's the one that is going to make you grimace a little bit, If you want a golden ratio, you're going to have to match your calves with the rest of your physique. So you cannot let the calves actually lag behind. Then for the next line of sets, weighted pull-ups, because it's absolutely necessary you do at least one heavy vertical pull. You can do a lat pull down if you cannot do weighted pull-ups. 4 sets of 4 to 8. And then you're going to superset that with a lunge or a Bulgarian split squat, 4 sets of 10 to 15. Again, all of the rep ranges, if I forget to tell you, are in the description with the program. So here we develop the lats, we develop the arms to an extent and the upper back in general. And then we're going to put some work towards the glutes and towards the quads. We are still going to train legs. You're not going to skip them altogether. And then some shrugs, because you can never do enough trap work. Although if you are someone who's exceptionally gifted, many people just do deadlifts and they have trap up to their ears, you can skip them because it is true that all of these statues, all of these Greek statues don't have the biggest traps. And then you superset that with another set of shoulder nucleus overload. After that, third day of the program is an arms upper hybrid. Again, why the upper? Because I'm not going to have you do an arm day because most of these statues, again, if you look at the examples I'm showing, don't have the biggest arms. They don't have spaghetti arms, but they don't have that bulging bicep. They don't have those veiny forearms. They don't have that sweeping tricep. They have toned, even saying that word makes me want to puke, but they have muscular arms, but it's not overblown because it has to go with the torso. So an hybrid of an upper and an arm day makes much more sense because that way we can still put the emphasis on the torso development. You start with a close grip bench, in line with what I just said, or diamond push-ups because calisthenics can hurt, and then you'll do some Seal rows or Pendlay rows supersetted with that. Pendlay rows if you want more leg involvement, Seal rows if you want to do something strictly for the upper back, 3 sets of 8 to 12. And you superset that with lat nucleus overload, so it might be some pullovers for example. As you can tell, especially for the first sets of the day, I stick to 3 sets for the most part. And the reason for that, and I just put a mistake in the program. Hello? The reason for that is because even though we are doing volume and we are doing intensity, don't get me wrong, I am trying to keep it down in a sense. Because with that type of goal physique, it would be better for you to focus on doability rather than that type of intensity. It doesn't mean that you cannot change the sets if you so wish, but I believe it's better to be conservative with that type of approach. So now for the next line for the arms and upper hybrid, you're going to do barbell or dumbbell curls up to your preference, 3 sets of 6 to 8, plus upright rows or lateral raises. If you want more trap development, rows. If you want more shoulder and especially medium delt development, lateral raises, 3 sets of 12 to 15. As you see, and as you've noticed with the physiques I've been showing you, the statues, not all golden ratios are born equal. There is that true perfection of the formula where a computer is going to create a perfect physique that's perfectly proportional. But that's not natural. Your physique will not be like this. So you will find that in RD, you're going to have your own idea of what the Fibonacci number represents. And that is why I give you choices between the lifts, because each type of lift is going to skew the development of the muscle one way or the other. It's going to be up to you to be smart with what you pick. Next set is going to be an ab superset or a vacuum type superset, and then triceps push downs, the one type of lateral tricep isolation in the program, 3 sets of 15 to 20. Another big giant set, but this time this one is easier to handle than the one for the upper one. And then we finish the day with the one bonified lower day where we're only going to be focused on the development of the lower body. It is going to happen once every 7 days for you. And it's going to start with a squat, a leg press, or a hack squat. Why on earth did I write 6 here? I will never know. But again, a correction I have to make before I post that program for you guys. So the hack squat is going to be for someone who doesn't want to bother with the technicality of the compound squat. The leg press is going to be for those of you guys that might have lower back problems if you squat. At the end of the day, I just want you to do a knee flexion because we cannot ignore the posterior chain altogether, or else you'll end up like one of those guys that is going to bend over when he's like 31 and break his back. It's good. It's very good to look like a statue. I'm a pure bodybuilder, but you also want some survivability. Huh? How do you write that? Survivability? What? Survivability. Survivability. Okay. You want some survivability. We're going to pretend I got that one the first try. And therefore, you also want when you turn around, you want to look like you're not like a sheet of paper floating through the trees. You also want some thickness to you, and that type of lift adds thickness. It's also the reason why people say it thickens the waist. Some thickening of the waist is not going to kill you, especially if the lats and the shoulder grow with it. If you're going to have a V taper, you want to be a capital V and not a minuscule V. That's the logic. Also, you want to eat. I want you to know that don't starve yourself to look like a statue. This guy used to eat. They were anabolic. They spent a ton of calories. So eat. Don't overdo it, but eat. You superset that with your calf raises. And then for the last sets of the day, the last line, you're going to do some hyperextensions or single leg dumbbell RDLs. This could in reality be whatever you want. You could do these glute arm raises. You could do the Nordic leg curl. You can even do machine leg curl. It's just to develop the hamstrings and the glutes and the lower back a tiny bit more. There's not much of a focus on the erector spinae in this program, simply because, again, the Farnese Hercules had a focus on that because you wanted to create the physique of a thick boy. Here it's an aesthetic boy, so it's not the same picture, it's not the same painting. But you're still going to do your 4 sets of that, don't skip it. Then you'll do your decline crunches. It's the one direct isolation ab exercise outside of your nucleus overload, so you don't skip it, because even though you don't want a thick core, you still want a developed core. A 6-pack on a V-taper looks good. And then you do your neck curls. It's the one time you're going to train neck. Again, look at all of these statues. Even David looks a little bit like a pretty boy. He doesn't have the thing where the neck is directly in line with the ears, which tends to mean you have a thicker than average neck. He has a smaller neck. It's not a bird's neck, but it's still a smaller neck. But I still want you to train your neck at least once a week for injury prevention if you ever get into a car crash one day, and even just to get some size there. You don't have to go overblown. And then shoulder nucleus overload to clôture the day. And that actually wraps it up for this aesthetic statue bodybuilding program, this Apollonian Physique workout. So I especially encourage the type of people, the youngins on this channel who want to look aesthetic, to follow that type of program instead of all of the garbage that these influencers are going to try to sell you. This one is free, it's 15 times better, and it's going to teach you something about programming. Plus, it's a good bridge, because if you follow this program for 6 months, a year and a half, you're going to make great gains, you're going to look like a Greek god, and on top of that, it's going to give you a chance to then segue into something better and bigger if you so decide to revamp your goal physique. I'm going to leave you with that. I hope you make these antique gains, and I also hope you have a good night.